Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today I'm going to be showing you how to pull off the door panel of my W140 Mercedes S-Class, as well as investigate a lock issue that I'm having. So those of you who have W140s will probably know that this little lock tab right here doesn't normally actuate by hand. It actuates with the vacuum lock system, and whenever the lock tab is up and the doors are unlocked, you can't push it down to manually actuate the lock. But on this one you can see you can. So either somebody unknowingly in the past, one of my passengers, pulled on that and to try to unlock the door and decoupled it, or something has failed in the actuator. I'm not sure which happened, but I'm going to pull apart the door to investigate and figure it out, and hopefully in this video show you how to fix that kind of issue. I've pulled the door panel off on the other side. I don't believe I've ever pulled this one off. It's a kind of not super complex process, but kind of a pain in the butt to get it off just because it's different from most other cars. But I will walk you through what it takes to do that with each step that I take in order to pull the panel off. So as I pull each individual part off that needs to come off, I'll talk to that portion of the process. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some tools and come over here and get started. All right, so the step I like to start with when pulling off the door panel is probably the hardest, and that's pulling off the door control switch panel. All of this is one unit, and basically what you need to do is on the side where this flat portion of the panel and the leather come together, you need to take a plastic pry tool, something like this, stick it in there as deep as you can, and run it up. And you can see on the panel, there's these two little plastic hooks or tabs that will flip out of the way and flip out of the way, and will then let you pivot the panel out and kind of around and out all the way like you see it here. Now, that's the hardest part. Finding the tool to get in there and actually flipping those tabs is a real pain. And unless you know about it beforehand or know about it from reading a service manual or doing it in the past, you're not going to know how to pull that off, and it's a really common thing to see broken. So, behind here, there's a screw right here in this hole. You probably can't see it on camera, but there's a hole right back here behind the handle. Take the screw out, and that should be it for behind that switch panel. And then I'm going to move on and show you some of the other parts that you need to take off in order to get the door off. All right, so the next step in pulling off the door panel is to remove this plastic piece. It's pretty simple, held on by one screw. Should just be able to unscrew it here. And should just pop off like so. And that basically holds this entire end of the door panel in place. So, gonna move on to the next part and show you that. Alrighty, so if I'm remembering everything correctly, we pulled out the screw behind the panel, pulled out the screw and the little plastic trim piece on the door latch, and I believe the last screw that we have to pull out before we just start popping door panel clips is right here. So this is in the handhold in the door panel, and essentially what you need to do is take a plastic pry tool with a sharp tip, something like that, a little cutout, pop the plastic cover loose, and you can see a screw right down in there. Take a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, pull that screw out, and I believe at this point we're ready to start popping panel clips. All right, so 2 more items that you need to remove before you can pull the panel off. I believe we're now at the point that we can. One item that I didn't mention before is there's a screw up in here. You have to look from underneath, and there's a screw right up underneath kind of where this handle is that bolts the door panel directly to the door. You got to take that out. Another Phillips head. And then the other thing that I forgot to mention is the triangle mirror trim piece up here. You have to pull that out as well. In order to do that, you will want to reach in from this side, and you can see right here where there's a little snap in, where the little panel snaps into place with a little plastic clip. You need to slide a pry tool right out there, pry out, the clip will pop out, and then the whole triangle panel will just lift off. It kind of hooks around all of these points right here. At this point, I believe we're ready to pull off the door panel. So what we need to do that is slide a plastic pry tool, a large beefy one, around the outside edges to pop all of the various clips out of their holes, and we should have a loose door panel at that point. All right, so I have the door panel off now. It was a bit of a struggle. In my particular case, the door panel basically stuck to the little rubber weather stripping that it is right next to. So I ended up having to take a plastic pry tool and kind of run it along and pry up the door panel from the plastic so it would release from these little metal clips that help hold it in. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt to figure out, but if yours is stuck and you know that you have everything else removed and the door panel swings freely, that's probably the best way to go about getting it off. Once it's free, you just have to remove the cable. You also have to unplug the lamp if you haven't already. I actually took the whole lamp out, so I just have the wire hanging there for it. But the last thing you have to do is unsnap the cable. Now the easy way to do that is normally this hook points downwards like you see here. You can basically just grab it with your hand or both hands and pull it up, being very careful not to snap any plastic. And then the nut and the retainer right here snap into a portion of the door. And the easiest way to get this out is simply to pull it out of place. So once you've done that, you have a door stripped of the door panel. At this point, I'm going to go into lock diagnosis. So you can see I still have the lock. I'm able to actuate it here with the portion that goes up and down. So what I need to do is get into the door lock mechanism, which should be in here. I'm not sure how open this door is. It feels like it's open here with plastic in a hole. And it feels like it's open-ish here. I'm not sure if it's fully open or not. So what I'm probably going to end up doing is taking off this bracket and then peeling back the plastic here and seeing how far I can get into it. Now, just know that pulling back any of this plastic and this foam, stuff may start kind of disintegrating with how old these cars are. Be cognizant of that. Be ready for that. Have a replacement in mind. In my case, I can probably patch any of the foam that comes off with foam that you can buy at a hardware or craft store. So I'm not super worried about that. I try to keep everything as intact as possible, though, because the plastic is a vapor barrier as well. So whenever water gets into the door, it prevents it from getting to the car. So I'm going to go ahead and start digging into this more. At this point, I have no instruction. I'm going kind of on my own. So I'll let you know what I find out. So hopefully you have a little bit of instruction if you're battling the same kind of problem. Okay, so you can see I have the door lining pulled aside, kind of pulled towards the front of the door. Unfortunately, it did rip in some places. What I'm going to do is use some weatherproof tape and patch these up on the back side, the plastic or Tyvek side. That should keep everything weather tight and everything. I'll probably need to use some supplemental adhesive whenever sticking this back into place. I'll let you know whenever I get to that point. But I got to the root cause of what's wrong with this door lock, and the actuator is fine. The door lock itself is fine. It's the rod between the actuator and the door lock. So I think at some point this door was locked and somebody tried to pull up on the lock and actually snap the rod. It looks like it's a sintered steel rod, so it's not the strongest thing, but it shouldn't have to be the strongest thing either for what it does. So I looked on eBay, happened to find a rod and actuator together used out of an S600 for a reasonable price. So I went ahead and purchased that. And what I'm going to do whenever that comes in a week or two or whenever it arrives, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at pulling this out. I think all that we'll have to do in order to kind of fix this issue up is pull the actuator out from down here, which I believe is just one Torx bolt and this little hook. And then because the rod is not connected to anything, it should just all slide out and slide out the bottom. I'm hoping no window or regulator or anything has to come out because that's going to be a real pain in the butt. And if that's the case, I should be able to take the rod off of the old unit that I purchased, the used unit, put it onto my current actuator in here that I know is good, and then slide it all back into place and clip it back up here. And the other half of the rod that will still be left in here, I'll have to unclip before that, obviously. So we'll come back and see what we can get going. All right, so you can see here I have the old actuator out, and actually I've put the repaired actuator in. So this is not the old actuator out of my car. You can see it's got a tag on it. This is the one that I'd ordered off of eBay. And I found out that there's two different styles of actuator. So I intended to just swap them around. At least that was one of my possible options. The other option was to replace the little metal portion of the actuator, which is what I ended up doing. But just so you're aware, there's two different styles of actuator at least. The style in my car basically does not have this sensor portion here with this connector and wire and everything. It's just a round unit with the same exact type of vacuum actuation system up here. Same port, same screw hole, everything is the same there. It just doesn't have the sensing portion over here. So this is a later revision. I know this came out of, I believe, a 97 or 99 vehicle. I can't remember which model year it was. Mine's a 95, so obviously somewhere in there a transition happened and they added a sensor for some sort of door lock sensing purposes. Just something to be aware of if you plan on changing out the entire actuator. Don't know if this bolts into place or not. Didn't even test it. I just swapped the rod, like I said. So right here, this is the old rod out of my car. You can see it's broken. That's where it's sheared. No real indication as to why. There's no abnormal wear on this thing, nothing like that. But to show you how to swap the rod, it took me a little bit to figure it out. It's not actually a threaded rod, it's just grooved. And then it goes into a grooved portion on the actuator here. It just snaps into place like so. And then this kind of trumpet portion slides up and clips into place. Now, something to be careful of is if you pull out the rod and you slide the trumpet portion up, you're going to have to disassemble the actuator to pull the trumpet portion back down. In order to pull the trumpet down, you have to hold onto the rod and just pull it down into place and lock it down into its down position. But if you push it up while there's no rod in there, there's no way to hold it hold the center portion from sliding down with the rest of it. Just something to keep in mind whenever you're swapping these out if that's what you decide to do. And once you've swapped your rod around, it's able to rotate freely in here. So whenever you put it in the car, you're gonna have to wheel it through the door and everything, which is something I've already done on mine. I've already put the repaired actuator back into place, and I'll show you that in a minute, but you have to get it into place. There's a whole bunch of plastic shields and everything to work around. It's just a process that you're gonna have to take your time with, work slowly. You might have to do it a couple times in order to get it perfectly situated and everything, but it's not super difficult to do. It's just something that you gotta take your time on. So, with this kind of explained, I'm going to go over to the car, talk a little bit about what I did over there, and show you the mechanism back in place, and then we should be able to wrap up. Okay, so the actuator, I don't remember if I explained this earlier in the video, is basically right behind here. It hooks into place through this square hole in the door, and the vacuum connector for it is right there. So in order to pop this connector off, basically what I did was took a plastic pry tool, stuck it up behind the connector, and just kind of popped and pulled. It's really, really easy to break those connectors, so just be very, very careful when you're popping those out. I'm not sure if they're available from Mercedes as replacements or not. I'm sure that there's got to be aftermarket replacements, but I'm always just super careful not to bust them up. The plastics get brittle over time, and it's a real pain in the butt sometimes. Once you've done that, there's a Torx, I believe, T25 screw, or maybe T30 screw. I'm not 100% sure, although I do have the bit right here, so let me verify for you. T30. Okay, so Torx T30 screw down here that holds the actuator in. And if your actuator snapped like mine, it's really easy to get out. You just have to slide the vacuum actuation portion of it up and then slide it down. There's a white plastic shield back here. I'm pretty sure for anti-theft purposes, so you can't slip a coat hanger in here and pop the door open. So kind of have to wheel it through that shield, and then it'll come out the bottom here. The window has to be up, but you can do it with the window regulator in. You don't have to pull anything else out. It's not the worst thing in the world. In fact, swapping out the actuator on my Lexus was significantly more difficult, at least significantly more painful, because the door is a lot less thick on that car. So, once you have the actuator out, you swap out the rod, put it all back together, and then you feed it back up in here. Now, if your rod snapped like mine, you have to get the other half of the rod out. It's kind of difficult. The easiest way that I found was to remove this plastic screw here. There's a clip back behind here. So you may need to reach your finger up through there and pop the clip out this way. And this metal bracket here will come out and pivot out of the way. You don't have to pull it all the way out. I didn't. I just pivoted it out to pivot out about 90 degrees from the door. And then in here, you have access to the area where this rod right here that controls the actual lock tab actuation connects to the actuator. And they connect, basically this slips over the 90-degree bend at the very top of that actuation rod. And then that goes through a plastic bushing that then connects to the actuation mechanism that translates into the door lock. So it's it's a couple different linkages that you have to get out. In order to disconnect the plastic bushing, it's a nylon bushing that kind of swings out of the way. So it's too small to film. It's kind of buried back in there, unfortunately. But to give you the best description of what I did, I got in there with a couple picks a pick and a pair of forceps. And I grabbed the plastic bushing with the forceps. There's a little bit of a flatted portion that you can grab with the tool. And then I used a pick to lever the actuation rod out of the way. And reinstallation was the same thing, just in reverse. I basically, I think in that case, just used a pair of pliers and kind of squoze the two together, and it pops into place. Once you get into the car and you see what you're working with, you'll probably see what I'm talking about. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. But again, it's something that's small and buried, so unfortunately it's not really filmable. So once you put everything back together, everything should work. I haven't tested this yet. I had an unfortunate battery issue. My battery decided to start leaking acid and die right as I was doing this job, which was unfortunate coincidence, but I got a new battery. I'm coming back to this about a week after I left it with the battery issue. So I'm going to go ahead and test it. Now, in order to test everything, you should be able to test the actuation with the door panel off and everything. This is just going to kind of be loose, but it still should move up and down, no problem. One thing to note, if you're testing, you got to have, it's really easy to easiest to have two people. Key in the ignition, driver door shut, somebody actuating the lock button while the other person presses and holds this little switch right here, which is the door open switch. The car won't lock or unlock the doors if one of the doors is open. It's got to think that the door's shut. So you got to make sure that you push that switch to make the car think that the door's shut. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and test it out. And if everything works well, I'm going to put the door panel back together. Like I said, I've got to repair the door panel cover there. Probably just going to throw some clean room tape, fab tape over it, maybe staple it in place so it doesn't, the adhesive doesn't melt and fall off in the summer. But short of that, everything should kind of just stick back in place, and reassembly should be the reverse of disassembly. So if everything works, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble everything, and I'm going to come back with the final result. Alrighty, I have everything put back together now, and I'll give you a quick demo of the lock. If I push the button, so the car thinks the door is shut, press the lock button, door locks now perfectly. Press the unlock button, the door unlocks. Everything works just as it should. So that's a successful repair. Wasn't too terrible, other than the battery issue, really. Wouldn't have been any stumbling blocks at all. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope this video helped you, and I'll see you in the next one.